Hello and welcome to the Potential Psychology Podcast. I'm your host, Ellen Jackson, and it's my mission to share the science of human behaviour in a practical, fun and inspiring way. In each podcast episode, I interview an expert from the fields of psychology, wellbeing, leadership, parenting or high performance. I pick their brain to uncover what they know about living well. What tips do they have for you and I? And I quiz them about how they apply their expertise in their own life. Join me as we discover simple, science-backed ways to live, learn, flourish, and fulfill your potential. Hello and welcome back to the Potential Psychology Podcast. I hope you're keeping well and coping as we enter week 77 of quarantine or ISO life or lockdown or whatever it is that you call it. These are strange days indeed, although I am conscious that a little bit of normality is creeping in for some of us. Some changes, some lifting of restrictions, but maybe too we're just adjusting to the new normal. We've had some interesting stats coming from a number of sources lately about how this pandemic is affecting our mental health and sense of wellbeing. A partnership between not-for-profit mindfulness tech business Smiling Mind, the makers of the app, and MyOb, the business software firm, surveyed more than 1,200 small business owners here in Australia, a community close to my heart. And 2/3 of those said that they feel that the COVID-19 pandemic has affected their mental well-being, with 64% reporting increased levels of stress and 62% saying they're feeling more anxious than usual. And the causes, more than half highlighted finances as an issue, and 41% said lack of sleep is taking a toll. And there's a similar pattern emerging across the globe, with the US poll indicating that nearly half of Americans report the coronavirus crisis is harming their mental health, while a federal emergency hotline for people in emotional distress in the US registered a more than 1,000% increase in April compared to the same time last year. So this stuff is having a big impact on how we're feeling, our stress levels. And here in Australia, the federal government recently released the National Mental Health and Wellbeing Pandemic Response Plan, which provides funding for a range of services to help within our community. And I was excited when I first saw this release, and I had a quick review of it. But what I found was what I feel is a continuation of a big gap here in Australia and maybe across the world, between the focus on mental health support for those who are already struggling with what we call clinical levels of distress or illness, or those who are at significant risk of that, and a more preventative approach that boosts mental health and psychological literacy, so an understanding and insight into our mental health across the entire community, which is not to say that it's not vital to support those who are unwell, because of course it is. It's just a bit lopsided. About 1 in 5 Australians experience mental ill health in their lifetime, so about 20% of us, which is a big number, way too big. But the pandemic-related data is suggesting that more like 3 or 4 out of 5 of us are experiencing heightened stress, anxiety, worry and poor sleep. And I suspect, in fact, 5 out of 5 of us are actually experiencing that stress at some level. So while the government response is fantastic, it doesn't really address, I feel, the majority of us until they slip into a state of mental ill health. And we really don't want that. I'd love to see a more preventative approach. I would love to see more support for programs that help us all to increase our psychological literacy, our understanding of our well-being, to engage in the everyday activities like self-care that would prevent a lot of mental ill health. Not for everyone. It's not going to work for everyone, but certainly for many of us, maybe for that other 80%. So anyway, I'm going to step down from my soapbox, but my guest for this episode and I do discuss our hopes for some positive change in the way our communities and institutions understand and encourage mental health as a preventative pursuit as a result of this pandemic. We're certainly far more aware of the impact of stressors, as we like to call them, on our well-being. That's been a big part of the conversation, which is fantastic. So starting to look now at, what they call positive mental health. It's a mental health boosting strategy, ways in which things like self-care can help us all to just operate at a healthier level in terms of our emotions and our psychological state on an everyday basis, so that when big things happen, because they do, they don't knock us sideways. We're more resilient and able to cope because we already have the tools, the techniques and the understanding at hand. So we do talk a little bit about that. And as I mentioned on the show last week, self-care, which is our topic for today, is a bit of a personal passion of mine right now. It's something that I'm talking a lot about. And of course, this seems like the right moment to mention the Potential Psychology Self-Care Club, which I will just do now before I introduce today's guest. The Self-Care Club is an online-based program. We have about 100 people involved at the moment, which is very cool. And I started it to help the Potential Psychology community, and that means you and me, to stay as well as we can right now. In fact, my goal is to take it a step further and help us all to thrive through 2020. So that positive mental health boosting type approach, even though this is by far the craziest year most of us have ever known, I figure if we can develop the skills and knowledge we need to remain resilient, learn, grow and thrive through 2020, there will be no stopping us after that. The Self-Care Club, as it presently stands, includes weekly video lessons from me on a topic that I've researched because I'm learning as we go, a weekly task or challenge, which is short and simple because I know no one really has any spare time at the moment, a live Wednesday wellbeing check-in in the members-only Facebook group. And these are proving to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to them each week and really enjoying them. There's some great conversations, tips, ideas, and mutual support being shared within the community, particularly in that Wednesday check-in, but across the week, we're getting posts of really, fascinating material that people are coming across, great ways to learn, grow, thrive, and sometimes just have a laugh together. And coming up, we also have some mini members-only podcast episodes in the Members Club, special expert interviews and longer webinars with me. It is a heap of fun. It's a really supportive group and a great opportunity to work on your wellbeing in really practical ways. You can find out more and join us in the Potential Psychology Self-Care Club on the Potential Psychology website, potential.com.au, and just look for Self-Care Club in the menu. Okay, so back to today's guest. I am thrilled to have Suzy Reading here with me today. Suzy is a UK-based chartered psychologist, a mother of two, a yoga teacher, a health coach, and the author of several books, including The Self-Care Revolution, The Little Book of Self-Care, and her new release, Self-Care for Tough Times, How to Heal in Times of Anxiety, Loss and Change. This is Suzy's second time as a guest on the show. We spoke about yoga and wellbeing in 2018, I think it was, and I'm excited to have her back today to talk about self-care. What is it and why is it important, especially now? Welcome, Suzy.
Oh, Ellen, thank you so much for having me back. It's always a pleasure.
So you have had an interest in self-care for a while. Can you tell us a little about what happened to kind of trigger this passion for you?
Sure. Well, there have been lots of fabulous twists and turns to my career. I'm a chartered psychologist, but I spent the first decade of my professional life working as a health coach, as a yoga teacher. It wasn't until I moved back to Australia to start a family that I reclaimed my psychological practice. And to be honest with you, it was life events of motherhood colliding with the terminal illness of my father that's where I first encountered the concept of self-care. And it really became a personal passion of mine because I could see how all of this experience that I'd had over 2 decades of working with people, whether that was using yoga as a means of therapy, or whether it was working as a psychologist and using talk therapy, or whether it was prescribing movement and breath work, I found that all of that combined with my life experience of knowing what it feels like to be energetically bankrupt, I was uniquely placed to empower people with the tools of self-care, showing them how that they could take care of themselves, head, heart, and body. And my own life experience just lent authenticity to understanding how people feel with the collision of life events, or, in periods of stress, loss, change, which, no one is immune from. And collectively, we are all experiencing that right now.
Absolutely. And I do remember, Suze, from our first conversation, that combination of events that were happening in your own life, and I think you described it as kind of hitting rock bottom, or you have that lovely term, I just like the language of being energetically bankrupt. Can you tell us a little more about what that feels like, even from your own personal experience? Because people may, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't speak at the end of the night. They may recognise it is the word I'm looking for.
Sure. I think it's really important to identify that no one is immune from energetic bankruptcy. It doesn't matter what tools you have at your fingertips' reach. No one is immune from winding them up flat on their back. And that's what I experienced. It was just a total overwhelm, a sense of burnout, a sense of fatigue. But it wasn't just related to energy. It was also, it permeated all levels of my being. It showed up in how I was thinking. I can remember thinking, how long is it going to take sleep deprivation to kill me? When is my child ever going to sleep through the night? And all of these sort of catastrophic, generalized thoughts. It showed up in my mood. I felt really quick to anger, very sensitive, very reactive. And I just felt so overstimulated. There was just so much noise of parenting a newborn. I literally felt like the best way I can describe it is that I put my finger in a plug socket, and I literally felt my nervous system was fried.
So that real combination of physical, emotional and psychological kind of overwhelm and burnout, as you say.
Exactly. And what I experienced in that state is that it's really hard to think straight. Yeah, it's really hard to make good choices. And I think one of the things that makes self-care so challenging is that it's not just about taking care of you in this moment. It's also lovingly tending to the person that you are becoming. And when you are feeling really fried and frazzled, it's so hard to delay gratification. So I found myself thinking, do you know what? I can't be bothered to eat dinner. I'm just so desperate to get my head down and go to sleep. But that one poor decision then led me to drink more caffeine in the morning, and then I felt more reactive, and it made it hard to get out and socialize. So there was this downward spiral. But I also recognized that conversely, one good choice led to a beautiful upward spiral, and it didn't take grand elaborate acts to actually rebuild my energy stores and put me back together. It was just one, what I call micro moment of nourishment at a time, that got me there. And obviously the love and support of those nearest and dearest to me, and some very good therapy.
And it's interesting what you say about not thinking straight. Is there an element of sort of really taking a while to recognise that that's where you've got to before you can start taking those steps, an element of self-awareness or of understanding, this is the point I'm at and I need to do something, even if these are just these micro steps in order to get back to where I need to be?
Yeah, I think that insight drops in pretty deeply and pretty quickly when you realize, hang on, I have to do something differently here because this is not working. It's when you literally, you can't see the forest for the trees. You think, no, I need to make better choices here. But it can be remarkably simple. And I really want to bring that home, that it doesn't have to be a huge change. It can be simply, when my daughter was sleeping in those early days, and she might only sleep for sort of 45 minutes at a time, I was watching daytime soaps like Bold and the Beautiful and Young and the Restless. And I tell you what, if you're not depressed before you watch those, you will be after. It was a simple switch of, don't do that. I'm going to roll out my yoga mat and just lie on it. And I did that for months. I literally had a little nana nap on my yoga mat. And that was so instrumental in my healing journey.
Yeah, the noticing, I suppose, comes first, and then it is that choice, or is it an awareness about a need to make a choice? I'm kind of really intrigued by what is it that triggers, because I know for me, if I am getting to that point of feeling like, okay, everything's feeling a bit too much right now, I've just learned through experience, and I suppose maybe it's professional or maybe it's, I don't know what it is, that yes, that's what I need to do. I actually need to invest in myself. But how do you find, whether it's for you or for clients, how do they get to that point of being able to say, I need to do something that isn't just the things that usually prop me up, maybe?
I think that, one, awareness is absolutely key. And you're so right, that first step is noticing. Until you notice, we can't do things differently. So it's that, I call it the mindfulness muscle, that ability to check in and bear witness. And then secondly, we need to give ourselves permission. Yeah, we need to observe that self-care is the thing that facilitates us being who it is that we aspire to be. So I think first and foremost, we've got to connect with where we're at. Then we need to give ourselves permission to lovingly tend to ourselves. And then the next step is building a toolkit of things that we can turn to that will help us feel how we want to feel or help us move through what we're feeling.
Okay, I'll come to that toolkit in a moment because you've got some lovely ways of working with that I have actually shared with clients and that I know you incorporate into your books. But that question of permission, because that's been a big one, I know for me personally, I think from a lot of the individuals that I've worked with, and I don't know if it's a gender specific thing for women or maybe it happens for men as well. I've never been a man, I don't know. But that feeling of, but I've got too much to do, or I have too many responsibilities, or there's still this and there's still dinner to be cooked and I still need to get this work finished and there's those emails and I have these obligations. I can't stop, for me. How do you help people get past that and give themselves permission to say, actually, I'm worth the time that I'm going to invest here?
I think it comes down to how we conceptualize self-care. So for a lot of people, self-care is synonymous with luxurious pampering acts. And granted, in the middle of cooking dinner, we can't just sit down and give ourselves a spa pedicure. However, there are nourishing practices that we can do in the moment. It's reframing how we see self-care as a practice, but it's also reframing how we see it as a concept. So it's not just indulgence, luxuriousness, it is tending to our health. Yeah, self-care is healthcare. It's taking care of ourselves mentally, physically, emotionally, and energetically. And even that, I think, is sometimes not enough to motivate people, right? Because we all know what it takes to be healthy and vital and abundant, right? It's another thing to actually make that happen. And it's often that we don't really value our health until it's compromised. So if health in itself is not enough to galvanize you to take better care of yourself so that you can keep giving and keep going, then think about any role that you hold dear. And if you think about what are the qualities that you aspire to possess in that role, and then I've got a couple of prompts. Think about how you are in that role when you're frazzled, when you're fed up, when you're full up. How does it affect your decision-making capacity? How does it show up in your behavior? How you speak to other people? How does it affect the people that you care about most? Conversely, if you describe yourself in that role when you are well nourished, how does it affect your ability to perform in that role, to be the kind of mum that you want to be the colleague that you want to be the autonomous individual that you want to be, right? And I think it's those two prompts that will help people connect with what's their personal why. What does self-care facilitate in your life that's really important to you, that's important to the people that you care about? I think that's the thing that unlocks our ability to do this stuff, to give ourselves permission to do this stuff.
I love that because I work with a lot of people in organisations and workplaces who would tell me there is too much to do. My manager expects this of me. My workload is incredible. I can't stop. I can't rest. I can't. And if they're not saying that outwardly, I sort of always get the sense they're still saying it inwardly. So to be able to frame it as, well, you will be a better colleague, a better employee, you will be better in your role that you clearly value because that is why you are so concerned about getting everything done in such a perfect manner. To be able to reframe it in that way is, I can imagine, very helpful. I think that would certainly help people if they don't. I don't like to think that any of us don't value our own health, but I think you're right. We don't necessarily put the premium on it that we should until it feels at risk or gets taken away entirely. But to be able to at least frame it up in a way that makes it more meaningful to trigger the motivation. It's all about the motivation, isn't it? And the why.
It is. It's the personal hook, and it will be different for everybody. But you've got to identify what that personal purpose is to then engage in it, because otherwise we've got a whole host of barriers that feel pretty tenacious.
Absolutely. So, Suzy, you mentioned before that you say that self-care is healthcare, which is a lovely, almost little catchphrase for it. And you've given us some ways of thinking about what it is as being so much more than pampering. Can you tell us a bit more about your vitality wheel and all the different components that you see as making up self-care, because it's so much more than just the pampering, and I think probably so much more than people might even imagine it would be.
I created the Vitality Wheel because I wanted to give people some kind of visual image to connect with, because in my experience, when you need self-care the most, that's when everything goes out the window. It's really hard to think about something that will deliver what you need in the moment. So we need it written down. But rather than having 100 different activities listed, it makes sense to map it out so that you use the Vitality Wheel essentially as a mind map. And it represents 8 different ways that you can nourish yourself. So one activity like going for a walk in nature with a friend, well, that could fall into 3 different spokes of the Vitality Wheel. And it doesn't matter where you put it. The whole point is that you put it down, you write down on the Vitality Wheel all the tips and tools and concepts that resonate for you, so that in moments of squeeze, you take a look and it connects you with something of resonance and something that's accessible. So it circumvents a whole heap of flapping about. You can go and do something and feel differently straight away. So should we just go through the 8 spokes of the Vitality Wheel, Ellen, so people know what they are?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Brilliant. Okay. So there's nothing new about this stuff. Please don't expect this to be totally new. However, there may be some things that people haven't necessarily associated with self-care. So I'm sure we'll be able to share this Vitality Wheel image with everyone later.
Absolutely.
But the Vitality Wheel pathways, this is based on all of my learning as a psychologist. So we're combining performance psychology, sports psychology, health psychology. There's a bit of CBT thrown in there. There's also acceptance and commitment therapy, mindfulness. It also combines my learning as a yoga teacher, personal trainer, and health coach, and as a fantastically normal and fallible human being. All of my mistakes are crystallized by this wheel. So the ways that we can nourish ourselves, we've got sleep, rest, relaxation, and breathing. Now, the reason why those are all together is that they all stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system. And I want to acknowledge that there are times in life when you can make every healthy, life-giving choice under the sun, and good sleep is still inaccessible. And in those times, relax. I mean it literally. When you can't get good sleep, please prioritize relaxation. And when there's not time for relaxation, I hear you. Everyone's nodding in agreement. We have our breathing to work with, okay, because it is still deeply soothing. And for people that say they don't have time for self-care, please just use your breath. You are doing it anyway, and it doesn't take any extra time. So that's the first spoke. Second spoke, we are looking at movement and nutrition. And all I want to say here is that quite often we associate what we eat and our hydration and our physical movement with nourishing our muscles, fueling our muscles, the physical body. It's really important that we move for mental health, and it's really important that we nourish and hydrate our mood, our mental clarity, our access to a sense of humour. And then we've got coping skills. That's self-explanatory. We've got physical environment. What that's talking about is that the environment that you live in, work in, commute in, all has a tangible impact on your well-being. So it's acknowledging that creating some kind of outer order is likely to lead to greater inner harmony. And it's also nourishing the skin that you live in. And it's also tapping into the vastly therapeutic benefits of being in nature. Then we've got social connection. Now, I call that one social connection rather than relationships, because you can connect with any other human being just by sharing a moment. You know, this is a real sense of shared humanity, communicating care, and that's something really beautiful. Obviously, we want to nourish relationships with nearest and dearest, but it's being on the lookout for opportunities to connect with anybody. Mood boosters, which is activities or skills that lift us up. And then the last 2 spokes of the wheel, we've got goal setting and accomplishment, and values and purpose. Now, they're the 2 that I would imagine not many people associate with self-care, but research has shown, positive psychology research has shown, that the right kind of goals really do galvanize us, and reflecting on what went well, the things that we've got done, boosts our sense of agency, our self-esteem, our self-belief, and our values and our purpose, identifying with our strengths, is tremendously galvanizing, especially in tough times. So that's the Vitality Wheel.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned the link to positive psychology, especially those 2, because when I was reviewing the Vitality Wheel recently, and they were things, and interesting, I've had some conversations with members of the potential psychology community of late about guiding our way through current challenges and the life of particularly work from home, parents juggling kids who are doing school from home and everything else that we're dealing with right now. And a couple had said, I was amazed at how good I felt when we finally got the laundry painted on the weekend. And when we finally dug the garden beds that I've been meaning to clear out and replant for years. And we got talking about the idea of a sense of achievement and just achieving goals that are important to us and how helpful they are to our self-care. And yet they're not exactly pampering type or luxurious type activities by any stretch.
Yeah, totally. Because sometimes the true act of self-care is the thing you least feel like doing, but it's about tying up incompletions. It's looking at what's depleting you and taking action on that. And sometimes it's addressing areas of pain and discomfort and doing something about it, which involves hard work. It's not always pleasant, and it's certainly not always easy.
Absolutely. And yet so important, just in terms of all of those aspects of ourselves, something that we can so easily neglect just because we don't think about it. Mm-hmm. Suzy, we sort of touched on it then, but from your point of view, why is self-care particularly important right now?
I think self-care is important every day because if you look at the nature of stress, it's ever present, right? It's just a normal part of life. So the fact that stress is ever present means we need nourishing practices to help soothe and calm our nervous system so that we can just cope with the status quo of life. Collectively, we're in the midst of a completely unprecedented experience where there's a sense of uncertainty. We don't know how long this will go on for. There's a real lack of control. Depending on the country that you're from, my goodness, there have been so many lives lost in this country. So there's a huge collective grief. But even if there aren't an enormous sense of loss on that front, we've all had our personal freedom impinged. We've all had a loss of autonomy. We're in these close quarters. This is a real squeeze. There's a real sense of pressure on all fronts. In a nutshell, there are 5 reasons why we all need regular self-care. The first reason is we need self-care to help us cope because life is challenging. Yeah, no one is immune from big emotions and fallout from relationships and deadlines, right? We need it to help us cope in the moment. Secondly, we need it to help us restore and heal because all too often we just push through. Life is relentless and we go, I'll rest on the weekend, it's fine. And, if we keep doing that for long enough, our bodies will stop us in our track and say, no, actually you have to listen. Yeah, we need it to help us restore. Thirdly, we need self-care to give us a protective buffer. Yeah, this is the resilience piece. We need it because who knows what's around the corner. And it's not just things that you don't want, like redundancy or conflict or ill health. It's things that you greatly aspire to, like buying a house or moving or renovation projects or, think about it, even planning a holiday when we can do that again. That incurs an energetic tax. Having a family, okay? So we need self-care to give us the reserves to cope with whatever it is that lies around the corner, the stuff that we don't want and the stuff we do want. Then the fourth reason we need self-care is that it gives us access to a better version of ourselves. Yeah, we talked about that earlier, that prompt of describing yourself when you're well nourished, when you're well slept, when you've fed yourself, when you've had a time to express yourself. Yeah, we need self-care so that we have access to compassion, patience, anything that you hold dear. And then for parents, if you want to raise compassionate, resilient kids, they need to be learning self-care. And that is best done by us modeling it for them, having a dialogue around it and helping them build their own toolkits so that they have age-appropriate tools and age-appropriate understanding of how it is that they can take care of themselves. And we're doing it already, right? You teach them how to cross roads safely, how to brush their teeth, what constitutes healthy eating. We also need to help them manage their emotions. Yeah, and maybe this hasn't been modeled for us, but we can learn together. And this is a beautiful opportunity for us to learn and grow together as a family.
That is a wonderful way of looking at what is otherwise quite a challenging situation because, yes, a lot of families are in very close quarters and maybe we can see it as an opportunity. If I am going to perhaps not master, at least dabble in positive self-care for myself, then how can I also help the rest of my family, my children, maybe partner as well? I know for my kids, there's been a bit of resistance around bedtime because it's like, well, it's not like we have to get up and go to school. And I'm like, well, no, we still need to get good sleep. We still need to stick to a regular routine. We might have a little bit more flexibility in that than we normally do, but for the most part, we're going to stick to life as it is. And one of my eldest child has been saying, oh, so-and-so doesn't have to get all their schoolwork finished. And I'm like, well, that's a choice that families make, and different families do things differently. And we're going to insist that you get all your schoolwork done. And I suppose that in a way that is a form of self-care as well, isn't it? It's just understanding routine, boundaries, the things that help us to be who we are and be who we want to be.
It is, but it's in that action of connecting with the value, the purpose of it. And I have the same conversations with my kids. This is why we're doing this. And when I get their buy-in, it's like, okay, now we're all on the same page. So it's trying to connect our children with a sense of, we do this thing because it facilitates this thing in our life. So we're going to keep a rhythm and regularity to our days, because that boosts, I wouldn't necessarily use these words with my kids, it boosts our circadian rhythms. So it means we can actually get to sleep with greater ease. We have better quality of sleep. And okay, we're not going to spend all day doing home learning. We're going to do it for this period of time. We have a sense of regularity. We do it in the morning, and then we enjoy the shapelessness of the afternoons, and that's fine. It's just knowing that there's a time. So this is where goal setting comes in. It's like, and maybe with kids, it's not about goal setting. It's more about intention setting. We have a loose intention. This is how we spend this parcel of time, knowing that it will come to an end, and that's fine. And then we get to move on to the next thing. It's a constant dance, isn't it?
It is, especially at the moment. Suzy, you've had a wealth of experience now of teaching others about self-care, your clients. You also have a significant presence online now with a wonderful Instagram feed where you share a lot of this work, both by video and the other beautiful content that you share. What have you learnt about self-care through the process of teaching others?
Oh, that's such a good question. When I first started talking about self-care, I was really excited about all the different tips and tools that I discovered. And very quickly, I got to learn about what the perceived barriers were. And I call them perceived because they're very easily overcome when you actually have a very broad toolkit from which to draw. So initially, those barriers that people were talking about were an absence of time. I hear you. No one has extra time for this stuff. Feeling like you don't have the energy. I get it. I've been flat on my back too. Feeling like there wasn't the available funds to do it. They were sort of the immediate ones. And then the longer I was talking about this and working with people, I think probably the bigger barriers are guilt, which we can overcome when we connect with purpose, right? Understanding what self-care allows us to do and be in our lives. But even bigger than that is feeling like we don't deserve it. And this is something that I'm diving into deeper now, helping people overcome this feeling that they're not worthy of self-care. And it's really big. You cannot achieve this in an Instagram post. This is working closely with someone and looking at how you can bring them back to connection with their body, to feeling like they can be their own safe place, that they deserve those feelings. And this is where I get to draw on all of my modalities of working with yoga, the breath, working with the body, working with the mind, and looking at resolving trauma.
Yeah, and as you were starting to talk through that, that's exactly what popped into my mind, is that some people at times, and perhaps we've all felt this at times, we just don't feel worthy of the investment or worthy of the time, or it is that prioritizing ourselves below everybody else because we're not, why am I important?
That's right. And this is really hard.
And I can see how that would be for some people. I hope that for a lot of people that connecting with your values would be enough, but certainly for some people, their emotions, thoughts around these things are more complex, and that being able to unpack that with a professional is enormously helpful.
And this is the thing. It's not just a mental abstraction. This is something that's wired in our nervous systems from our life experience. So you can't just reason your way through it. You can't just say to yourself, no, I do deserve it. It's a literal repatterning of our nervous system so that we dial down the stress response, so that we can become our own safe place. And that does require partnership and working with someone that's experienced in trauma. But I think this is something that touches us all. I don't think there have to be, huge traumatic childhood life experiences. I think there's a messaging around, you look at motherhood, and that to be a good mother requires enormous self-sacrifice, and that it's not okay to have needs. We've got to take a look at these cultural messages too, and understand that absolutely every single person deserves to be well nourished. But thankfully, that nourishment doesn't have to take half a day. It can be embedded in how we live our lives with very, very simple tools and skills that can make an enormous difference to how we experience life and how we are experienced as human beings.
So what are some of your quick wins then? You mentioned breathing before, and I know that's one that I'm a great advocate for as well, because it is always available to us. It's free. It's very straightforward, can be done anywhere, but we just need to know a little bit about how to do it in the way that, obviously we all know how to breathe, but there are ways to breathe that help with that reduction of the stress response, the activating of our relaxation response.
Yeah.
So that's one. And you mentioned even for you, just lying on your yoga mat, not even having to make any shapes or do any poses, but just lying. Are there other sort of quick wins that you advocate for someone who perhaps is feeling at that total overwhelm? I don't have time, but they want to be able to make those first simple steps.
I've got 100 going through my head all at once. Okay. For someone that's in a state of overwhelm, who feels like, oh my God, I've got nothing left in the tank, then what I would recommend is lying down with your legs up the wall. So legs up the wall is deeply restorative, because by elevating the legs, you're redistributing all the blood flow to the vital organs. This is the position in first aid that we put someone in when they're in shock. So there's nothing fluffy about this stuff. The beauty of being in legs up the wall is that there's no pressure to sleep. Sometimes if you go to bed and you're desperate to drop off, and if it doesn't happen, we can feel robbed. Or if you do drop off and someone wakes you up, you think, I haven't had the sleep that I need. You can lie down in legs up the wall for 5 minutes, 20 minutes. And if those in your care are safe and you drop off, great. Maybe you just might need to set yourself an alarm. The whole point of it is you're just giving yourself time and space to replenish. There's no point lying down in legs up the wall and then ruminating on your to-do list. Keep your mind anchored on something soothing, whether it's, listen to a piece of music, listen to a guided relaxation, or just feel the sensations of your breath, or use a mantra. Yeah, really powerful. If you don't have time to stop and drop and get your legs up the wall, then the one that I would recommend is called massaging your horns. We make a gentle fist in both hands, and the soft part at the base of your thumb, you're going to press that into your forehead as if you are massaging firmly 2 little goatee horns on your forehead. And if you press there, what I'm hoping you'll experience is that it relaxes your eyes, it smooths out that space in between your eyebrows, it releases your jaw. Maybe you'll feel even the tongue soften in your mouth, and it slows your rate of breathing down. And in the moment, it is just like hitting the reboot button for your nervous system.
How glorious.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't tried that one. I have certainly, as somebody who's practiced yoga for a long time, legs up the wall, which I know it probably sounds bonkers to anybody who's listening who can't even visualize what we're talking about here, but it is wonderful. It is just a wonderful feeling. I suppose too, when you think about, I was just trying to think, probably I do we massage our forehead a bit if we're feeling stressed or overwhelmed. Yeah.
If you get bad news, you'll go, bring the back of your hand to your forehead. Or if you're sitting at a table, you'll fold your hands and you'll rest your head on your hands. You'll go, oh my God. Basically, it's the oh my God reflex, right? The body is hardwired to heal itself. You have an innate healing capacity. Our job is to reconnect with it. And that's what that does. Just by earthing a brow, massaging the horns, or resting in child's pose. That's why those floor-based yoga poses are so powerful, because you are earthing the brow, that acupressure point in your forehead.
Which again, probably for anybody who hasn't tried it. So my challenge for anyone listening who's going, I don't really get this stuff, this sounds weird, try it. Try it and just notice how it makes you feel, because that was certainly for me the access point to a lot of self-care practice has been through yoga and just the experience of noticing my body. So noticing enough to know that my jaw is clenched, especially if I get into bed at night. And this was the first few weeks of this global pandemic. I would get into bed at night, and it was only when I actually stopped and said, right, take a few deep breaths and just notice what's going on. And my jaw was hard as rock, it was so tight. But it took me until I got to that point of consciousness of saying, right, notice what's going on. Before I noticed it, I would have been walking around like that all day without paying any attention to it. So the practice of yoga for me, and just that getting used to seeing how your body feels and noticing where things are tight, uncomfortable, clenched, sore, was sort of that first point. And then once we've got that, we can start to do some of those massage your horns or the legs up the wall or the 5 deep breaths.
That's it. It's the noticing and then having a really big toolkit, because different things in different moments will be the tonic. So for the jaw, the one that I like is you could just do a little pitter-patter of your fingertips around your cheekbones. That feels nice. That draws awareness to it. And then we can sort of physically go, oh, hang on, there's something to let go of. And then with your fingertips, if you firmly stroke downwards from the jaw down towards your jawline, that's a lovely sensation. That's basically massaging the TMJ, that strong band of muscle that attaches the jaw. That's a lovely thing.
And for our listeners, Suzy is modelling all of this for me over video so I can see what she's doing. And she looks more relaxed as she's doing it, I have to say.
It's such a lovely thing. And then the other thing that you can do, if there's tension in the neck and the shoulders, the one that I really like is the chicken wing shoulder roll. And the reason why this one is so powerful, and I'll talk everyone through it, is that it's bringing us into a tall, upright posture, which research has shown has a huge impact on our subjective energy levels and our mood. When you stand up tall, it lifts your mood, it lifts your energy. It helps us feel a sense of personal power, optimism, and zest. If you're stooping or slumping, which is basically the position that any screen brings us into, or carrying young beings, we lose our neck. And in that shape, it's actually easier to recall negative memories. It's easy to make someone cry. It lowers your mood and it lowers your energy. So the chicken wing shoulder roll is basically mood alchemy. And if you pop your fingertips on your shoulders to form your chicken wing, as you breathe in, you sweep your elbows forwards and up. And as you breathe out, you take them back and down. And we only do it in that action, that direction, up, back, and down. Do it a couple of times. This is your alternative to a 3rd cup of coffee or any coffee afternoon. It helps you breathe better. It lifts you into that tall, upright posture. The silly name, I hope, will make you giggle. And it changes how you feel.
Absolutely. I'm going to try that one as well. I know for me, the shoulder roll, I haven't tried it with the hands up on my shoulder, so fingertips up on my shoulder, but even just that shoulder roll. And I know, again, in yoga practice, if you've been doing any kind of floor work and then you get up and stand upright, and just that experience of standing upright, rolling your shoulders back, and then kind of, lifting your chin is an energizing, positive feeling. It really contributes to that mood that you're generating during your yoga practice.
It does. Now, the shoulder roll is good. That's a good point, Ellen. But when you get the elbows involved, it makes it a bigger action, and it's like bellows. The arms act as bellows, so it helps you breathe better. So it makes it more effective. And the mantra is, when you breathe better, you feel better.
Mm-hmm. That makes perfect sense. Suzy, you've given us some wonderful examples of the really simple things you can do, and you can do them. I'm visualizing myself this evening getting a bit frantic, trying to get dinner ready while there were children, not showering, and my husband wasn't home yet. And I knew we had this call coming up. And, just those simple things that you can do where you just suddenly go, okay, I'm starting to feel overwhelmed and frazzled, but you don't have to take time out or do anything that's complex or expensive or any of those excuses perhaps that we give ourselves. We can massage our forehead. We can do our chicken wing shoulder rolls.
Yes.
We can take our deep breaths. We can tap our cheekbones, whatever it takes. And just even perhaps the little ritual of that, of saying, I'm doing this because it makes me feel better and that's a good thing, I think has a positive psychological benefit as well, doesn't it?
It does indeed. It's an affirmation of self-worth. It's just saying, I deserve tenderness. It's okay for me to nourish myself. And when I nourish myself, I can be all of those things that I aspire to be. And it's such a beautiful win-win.
Suzy, can you just tell us very quickly, because I know I said I'd let you go, but you've got 3 books now for adults. You've got one for children as well, haven't you, that I recalled while we were talking?
I do.
Stand Tall Like a Mountain, is that the children's book?
Stand Tall Like a Mountain, it's mindfulness and self-care for parents and kids. So it's designed to be read by parents, but shared with their children, and it builds a toolkit of family practices that we can engage in together, which is, I think, the thing that makes self-care accessible for us parents. It's not something that you have to go off and do on your own. This is something that we can do together, and it bonds us deeply together in the process.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I'll put a link to all of the books in the show notes for this episode. One that I have recently acquired myself is the Stop the Little Book of Self-Care Tips, 30 Self-Care Tips, which I just found delightful. Aside from anything else, it's this lovely little pocket-sized book with a really beautiful, succinct introduction. And then it goes through all of these 30 different simple activities that you can do, some of which you've described for us, but lots of others, and categorises them, I suppose, according to the vitality wheel, which I think just gives us that lovely conceptual model of where these things fit in if we're looking at the whole totality of human self-care. And could you just tell us briefly about the new book?
Sure. Okay, Self-Care for Tough Times. I actually finished writing that at the end of last year. So before any of this pandemic erupted, I had no idea that this book would be so collectively useful. I knew that it would be useful for people at different points in their lives, but it's something that we all need right now. And basically, I wanted to share with people what are the underlying skills that help us navigate anxiety and stress, grief and loss, and change and transition. Because I think when we connect with the skills, we can look for ways that we can use them throughout our day in ways that don't take any extra time. It's just identifying that to navigate stress, we need to learn how to relax. To navigate grief, we need to learn how to feel our feelings. And to cope with change and transition, we've got to build tolerance for ambiguity, patience to sit with the discomfort of change, but also it's an embodied state of reminding yourself that you can have your own back and you can speak your truth and you can take action in service of your values.
So a wonderful way of, well, as you say, collectively beneficial for everyone right now, but also for future. I think if we can look at this current experience in a positive way, and perhaps this is one of these very useful little guides to help us do this, it's to say, what can I learn now that will stand me in good stead when it comes to whatever life throws at me? Because although I hope none of us have to go through a global pandemic again, there will be tough times, there will be trauma, there will be challenge. Life is never smooth sailing. So maybe this is the toolkit for now that will help keep us in good stead for the future.
I would hope so. Yeah, and just understanding why this is so important. And I think people are genuinely getting that now. We need to nourish ourselves, and we're having to be creative about how we can do that. So I think that does. I hope that this is something that we will sustain and that we will feel that we have grown as a result.
I'm optimistic that we will. And I'm enormously grateful to you for sharing everything that you have today, the practical tips and tools, but also just the beautiful ways of conceptualizing why this is important, not just now, but to all of us all the time in such lovely language. I will put links to all of your books, the multiple books, in the show notes for today's episode, as well as particularly your Instagram feed, because of all the beautiful work that you do there, but also all of your contact details and your website and where people can find you and find out more about the work that you do. Suzy, I really appreciate the time you've taken today to have this conversation with me. We did have some technical troubles trying to get things set up. We're both working with the challenges of working from home, although the technical troubles were all mine tonight. So I appreciate your patience with that. And as always, just glorious to speak to you.
Such a joy, Ellen. I'm really grateful for the opportunity, and I hope that people feel like self-care is a little bit more accessible as a result of our conversation today. Take good care, everyone.
I'm quite sure they will, because I know it's helped me. It's been a really wonderful reminder, and I'm talking about this stuff all day, every day at the moment too. So for everybody else listening, I'm sure they're also enormously grateful for your words of wisdom, your advice, your tips and tools, and just your wealth of knowledge in this area.
Thanks, Ellen.
There is something very soothing about speaking to Suzy. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did and that you are inspired to take even a few moments a day to invest in your self-care. We have included the links to Suzy's books, her social feeds and her website in the show notes for this episode. We've also included a link to my previous podcast conversation with Suzy and her Vitality Wheel, which I can highly recommend as a great visual guide for a comprehensive approach to self-care. Don't forget the Potential Psychology Self-Care Club either. It's the perfect place to develop your self-care skills in the company of a wonderfully supportive and positive community. You can find out more via our website at potential.com.au, and you can join at any time too. We have been going for a month or so now, but the content from previous weeks is there at your disposal from the moment that you join. We also have that weekly wellbeing Wednesday wellbeing check-in that I mentioned earlier. That's a conversation in the members only Facebook group that takes place once a week. And I'll be including some special video excerpts from today's podcast interview with Suzy Reading in the club as well. If you're enjoying the show and you'd like to support us further, please say hi and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Every review helps others to find the podcast, and together we can spread the word about our guests, positive psychology, and how to live a thriving, happy life. We'll be back again with another episode soon in our flexible and fluid season this season. I promise that to you. But in the meantime, keep thriving, and I will see you again very soon.